Welcome to everyone. The reason that you're here is because in some capacity you have committed to helping with children's ministries at Trinity, and we appreciate all of you. We appreciate the fact that you are giving of your time and your love. I'm going to let Jenna get started, and if you have questions along the way, please feel free to raise your hand. We are more than happy to answer any questions or concerns that you have.
So we're going to start by watching a video.
Did you know child abuse can be prevented? All children need to overcome lots of hurdles in life, but child abuse shouldn't be one of them. If we work together, we can make sure no child needs to face this hurdle.
Instead of just being shocked, let's do something. What we know is connected communities can help prevent child abuse and neglect. We can build stronger communities. We can support families. We can make sure all children have a range of opportunities to play, learn, and grow well. And we can make sure everyone knows how to play their part in building a better future for our children. What are we waiting for? You can make a difference now.
So as Pat said, we're here to create a safe place for our children at Trinity, and you have all volunteered to help with that. So we're going to be discussing the policy that is in place today.
If you've been coming for several years to this, you'll notice that we've shortened the forms up. A lot of the information that the forms previously had, like Social Security numbers and more personal information, we don't need. All we need is minimal information to run a background check. So if you have concerns about confidentiality, all of that previous forms have been destroyed, so we only keep minimal information.
So I'm going to start with child abuse definitions. So, child abuse definitions. Child abuse is defined as harm or threatened harm to a child's health or welfare that occurs through non-accidental physical or mental injury, sexual abuse, sexual exploitation, or maltreatment by the person responsible for the child's care. So that includes more than just a parent or a legal guardian. That can include a teacher or a church volunteer or a pastor. So it's really any adult that is caring for a child. And abuse can be physical, emotional, or sexual. So for stage 3, Trinity goes into a little bit more detail about what sexual abuse is, because it is pretty detailed. So, and if you don't have a policy, Roseanne has copies of them that you can look through as we go through this training. And then neglect is another form of abuse, and that's failure to provide adequate food, clothing, shelter, or medical care, so meeting the child's basic needs. So we are here to talk about what the role is for church volunteers. So for new volunteers, they will need to complete a volunteer application form. This form was revamped last year and everybody completed it, but if you're a new volunteer, you'll need to complete that as well. And then that application goes in front of council, and then they approve whether or not somebody can volunteer here at Trinity. And then ongoing volunteers, so anybody needs to attend the annual training, so that's what we're doing here today. And then everybody needs to submit to a background check. So there is a yellow form back at the last pew that you can take with you to complete that form, so that we can run that background check per our policy. And then volunteers are required to present and display appropriate conduct. So on pages 4 and 5 of the policy, it talks about what is prohibited and what is permitted conduct. So the prohibited conduct section really talks about different examples of abuse. So like I was saying before, hitting, kicking, slapping, or shoving, that would be a form of physical abuse. So you can read through those, and this is not an extensive list either. There are other types of abuse as well, but this just gives you an example of some of the prohibited conduct. And then for permitted conduct, Trinity lists 4 in particular: show appropriate Christian love and affection, sharing emotional and spiritual concerns, provide necessary medical care and attention, and encouraging another member to appropriately express and share their Christian love. So we require that our volunteers abide by that standard regarding conduct. And then it's also important to remember guidelines when talking privately with others. We know that there are times that private conversations need to occur, and we understand that, but at the same time, private conversations between an adult and a child can create a high-risk environment for potential abuse situations to arise. And so Trinity has listed out 10 different things to kind of keep in mind if you are going to be having a conversation with a child that might be private or confidential. So location is one. Can you have the conversation in a public setting and still have it be private, such as a coffee shop or something like that? And like I said, there's 10 of them, so you can kind of read through them and ask yourselves questions with each of them to determine if it's something that you need to have a conversation privately with a child, or if it can be done elsewhere or not done at all. It really just depends on the situation. So they're, like I said, those are just considerations or guidelines. And then the last thing that church volunteers need to do is report any suspected or alleged incidences of abuse. And so we're gonna watch a video about what to do when information is disclosed, that a child discloses.
It's never easy when a young person discloses abuse. There are probably 1,000 things going through your head, from trying to remember your organisation's safeguarding procedure, to asking the right questions. Should you be asking questions at all? But no matter how anxious you're feeling, it's worth remembering that most young people only choose to talk to someone they really trust. So chances are you're already doing something right. Whatever the situation, here are a few simple things you can do to create a safe space for a better conversation. Help them open up. For some children, talking about abuse can be scary. You need to show them that you care and that you are listening to what they say. This can be as simple as changing your body language, and avoid anything that can make you seem distracted or distant. Keep your focus on them. They're the most important thing right now. Slow down and take your time. This chat might only be a small part of the disclosure. They could just be testing the water, so let them go at their own pace. Even if the gaps in the conversation feel awkward to you, it's their story. Give them time to tell it. Reflect back and show you understand by simply going through what they've told you already. If possible, use their language. The specific words they use are an important part of their narrative. And although it's easy to jump to conclusions, or even solutions, right now they just need to feel listened to. You can practice these techniques whenever someone's telling you a story, helping them to open up, slowing things down, and reflecting back in everyday conversations. Won't just make you a better listener, but will also prepare you for when a disclosure does happen. It could change a young person's life.
So in addition to those techniques that were described, we also have a document that talks about suggestions to respond to a child who has disclosed abuse. And this is something that has been handed out in the past couple years, so we weren't going to hand it out again this year, but we will have extra copies of it, and it will be the salmon colored, just to help you remember throughout the year regarding this. And then on the back side of it, it talks about signs and symptoms of child abuse as well. But there were a couple things that I wanted to point out regarding suggestions to responding to a child who's disclosing abuse. And the first one is to make sure that you take the child seriously. Don't try to convince the child that the story is not true. Your job is not to investigate the situation. It's to be just a listening ear for them. Like it said in the video, they trust you. So, and you might be the only person that they tell. And then another thing is to make sure not to promise to tell anybody, because you're required and you're mandated to tell somebody. So you might have to say that you need to tell somebody that so they can help the situation. So kind of from that, after this information is disclosed and you've had that conversation with a child, if you're a mandated reporter, you must be calling centralized intake first. Otherwise, you should report the information to the Vice President of Council, who is currently Dan Powell. And any allegation of abuse will be taken seriously and confidentiality will be maintained throughout. And on pages 7 and 8 in the policy, it goes over more detail regarding what the church's steps are in investigating a situation where a child has disclosed potential abuse or neglect. So I think you can go to the next slide.
So we have had our policy has been in effect since 2015 at Trinity, and last year was updated, and council approved the updates to help all of us know better how the policy needed to be implemented. It's basically a structure that we hang on how we do things so that we know that we are monitoring and we are following the correct way to do things here. It's primarily for the protection of children, but it's also for the protection of Trinity Church. So a few things that the policy emphasizes that we just wanted to review with you today. You've heard them and you're doing them well. We do a review every year and present it to council how the different groups are following policy procedure, and we are very pleased that everyone is following the structure as it's set up. Reminders, 2 or more unrelated adult leaders per ministry group. This is for the protection of the leaders as much as for the children. A monitor should be present for all youth ministry groups. That can be the leader, the primary leader of GEMS, that can be the primary leader of any group. The council people, the council members are taking an assignment every Sunday morning. One of them is monitoring in the back. I'm sure you've all seen them. For other activities that occur at the church where there are going to be outside people coming, like the program for music camp, there were monitors in place to make sure that someone was responsible to be aware of what was going on. Tell the pastor or Safe Church Committee if policies or procedures are not being followed, or if you're having difficulty for one reason or another following the procedure. We'll work with you on how to come up with a plan to do it. It's not a one-size-fits-all. In terms of sign-in sheets and sign-out sheets and how you monitor and all of that. So by all means, be talking to someone if you're having any challenge with it. Regarding the nursery, they've done a very good job of implementing the policy and firming that up. If you are in the nursery taking a role there, you've learned that there's a primary nursery attendant and a secondary one. And the primary one is the one responsible for the bulk of the responsibility. Parents may come into the nursery to drop their child off, but only nursery attendants may stay in the nursery. The exception to this would be as if there's a parent who has taken this training and wants to stay for a few minutes, they may stay for a few minutes. If it is a guest to our church, we have established that the library is a good place for them if they want to do some care with their child and not just drop their child off, that they can sit quietly in the library for that period of time, but we don't have outsiders stay in the nursery itself. Parents must sign their child in and out of the nursery using this sign-in sheet. The bathroom door needs to remain open at all times. So these rules have been implemented and followed, and the nursery committee is doing a good job of continuing to see if there are other areas that we need to make changes. They are still working on some other things. Okay. Youth ministry leaders must provide a list of volunteers annually. That just means that, like Brandon's already, and Heidi have already turned in a list of their Sunday school teachers and so on, so that we can check off who needs to have attended this or watched this. If there were some from your team that were not able to be here, there will be DVD copies of this today that they can watch and sign off on. A sign-in system will be utilized for all youth programs. Again, we're willing to work with any of the programs to see how can this happen. Sign-in sheets should be put in the Safe Church mailbox. After an activity, Safe Church mailbox is right by the office, right by the bulletin secretary's box, all the other ones. Music camp must abide by the policy and have a monitor present for sessions and programming. They've done that for the past 2 years, and have done a fine job with that. It's gone very well. Transportation, that's an area we don't talk about much because we don't transport a lot of our children or young people here, but it is an area that if we do, we have to be aware of. Adult transportation volunteers must abide by this policy and have watched and have viewed the training. Adult transportation volunteers must have a valid driver's license, and a minimum of 3 people will be in a car at all times. This is one case where we do say that if, say, for task, it's a husband and wife couple that are going to be driving, we're fine with that as long as there is more than one child in the car. Okay, Hannah? Safe people. Our policy has designated that there will be safe people identified for Trinity Church, who are basically your go-to people. They're not experts, they're not going to solve the problem, but they're going to give you some advice on where you can go, or even perhaps listen to a child. If you say, I'd just like you to sit with so-and-so and have a conversation, or if you have a concern that you want to identify and you say, I just don't know if this is something we should be concerned about, these people will direct you or help you. And this year, council has approved Phil Smulligan, Gladys Pell, myself, and Derek DeCrager. This list is hanging out in the Trinity Hall as well, to, if you forget who they are, to ask for some assistance. Hannah?
That is all that we have for today. You will want to